Hey there, folks. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from Command Central at the Philanthropy Mastermind series. And that's a series title we came up with a few years ago just to make it clear what we were talking about here. And we have had a lot of really extraordinary people in this series. If there's a term that really defines a person we're going to be talking with today, it is definitely mastermind for that person. But before I introduce her to you, in case you don't already know her work, and chances are you do, I want to welcome you here. And of course, thank our sponsor of the series, which is DonorSearch. And unless our guest chooses to mention them for some reason, we won't be talking about them today, but don't go away. You can learn more about their work and about your donors. And we're going to be talking a lot about donors today at DonorSearch.net. There's a lot of information there on that, as well as a way to sign up for the rest of this series and to look at past episodes, which you can do not only in their YouTube channel, but also at the resource tab. So just take a look for that if you would, and you can find a recording of this session along with hundreds of others right there, once again, at DonorSearch.net. Now, one of the things that we often will talk about in this series is how you can engage. And as you know, we cannot see you or hear you, at least I think you know that, but we do want to hear from you. So please do use the chat and the Q&A today. There won't be any slides that we'll be showing you, so that means this is really a chance to engage in some robust conversation about a topic which sometimes can seem arcane and other times can be controversial. And I hope we'll get into both of those things, both the numbers and the meaning of those numbers today. But just to warm this thing up, if you wouldn't mind just saying hello in the chat right now and just letting us know maybe which part of the country you're from. And thank you, Frank, already for doing that. At Safe Cities in Las Vegas. Appreciate that. Thank you, Hannah from Dallas. Daniel, always good to see you from Nairobi. You definitely win the award for distance. And we have a lot of others here, Pat and Liza and Lucy and Holly. Wow, Lee, I can't keep up with all the names, but keep them coming for you. And also for our guest. I know she'll appreciate knowing where you're from, at least geographically. Another thing I might ask that I don't typically ask is, do you work in something that resembles planned giving, estate planning, anything that's really about helping people to make a decision which maybe outlives them? And because that would be really, and yes, we hear you, Ellen. You say you need help. We're happy to provide that help today. So as you go and answer that question, we have some yeses here. And other folks, whoever you are, whatever you do, stick around. It's going to be a conversation that will definitely engage you. We're going to be monitoring chat and Q&A throughout. But now I want to introduce to you someone who we always say, well, this person needs no introduction. This person deserves one, even if she doesn't require one. And that's Laura MacDonald. Laura is, among other things, of course, the principal and founder at Benefactor. If you don't know Benefactor, I'm sure you'll hear a little bit about them today, but I want you to check them out afterwards. We'll make sure to include a link. And then additionally, you may not know some of the other things she's done which have such an impact on the sector. So she's served as board chair of the Giving USA Foundation. We've talked about them a lot in this series. You want to get your copy this year. She's been in the past a member of the board of the Legacy Fund of the Columbus Foundation. She's been on the Development and Membership Executive Committee of the American Alliance of Museums, something that's close to those of us who have cut our teeth in the arts, very close to our hearts. Of course, she's also, as you probably saw in the promotion for today's conversation, the author of a new book, the Endowment Handbook. And we'll talk more about that in just a second, but I will say one thing about it, which is that if you're looking for another book on that subject, you'll have to look back 20 years to find one. So we're very lucky to be able to talk about that today. Thank you so much, Laura, for hanging out and talking.
Oh, Jay, it's a joy to be talking with you. And as you know, I geek out on all of this stuff. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
This is definitely going to be a geek fest in the best sense. And so maybe the best place to start is some definitions, if you don't mind. Okay, so we build this as seizing the intergenerational transfer of wealth. That's something that we've talked about in this sector for a long time. I remember the people from Boston College talking about this, Paul Shervish and others, about 114 trillion, 140 trillion, all these different numbers for all these different generations. What are we talking about today when we talk about the intergenerational transfer of wealth?
What we're talking about is the wealth that was amassed by baby boomers and their older siblings or parents, which is thought to be the largest concentration of wealth ever in the history of any society in the world. Right now, the estimates are that those generations, our generations, baby boomer, I'll confess, hold, and not me personally, hold a little over $100 trillion of wealth. And of that, some of that will be spent or will go to taxes. But about $84 trillion with a T will pass on either to heirs, about $72 million or billion dollars, it's thought will go to heirs, trillion dollars, $72 trillion will go to heirs. And about $12 trillion, it's estimated, will go to nonprofit organizations in the form of charitable bequests. If that entire amount were endowed, the draw, a 4.5% draw, would exceed total charitable giving in 2020.
First of all, where do these numbers come from? I mean, how do people estimate something like this?
There are a variety of sources, and it is an econometric model. There isn't a gerbil on a wheel somewhere powering a counter. The data that I'm looking at actually was most recently in a New York Times article. I can share that citation with you so that you can share it with your audience. And they were then referencing a research firm that works with many of the big retirement planners and asset holders. And so you'll see the citation both from the New York Times article and from the source that they received it from.
And when we're talking about this now, we are talking about baby boomers. So again, I know that this should be obvious, but marketers are always kind of changing labels on us. So what ages are we talking about?
So the first thing I would do is go to the Pew Research for the definition. They're the ones who define, in my mind, define what each definition means. And so what we're talking about, those who were born prior to 1965.
Right.
So those who were born in 1964 and earlier, of which there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 million Americans that fit that qualification. And, you know, when we talk about this great intergenerational transfer of wealth, a lot of folks, I sometimes will ask an audience, how many of you are absolutely getting an avalanche of realized bequests? And there's silence and then nervous laughter, and nobody is admitting to having that deluge. A couple of things to remember. If every organization received their fair share, an equal share of this, it would be about $8 million per organization. That is not what will happen. These assets aren't distributed equitably today, and they won't be in the nonprofit sector. We each need to make our own inspired connections with donors so that they will think of our organizations when we want that. So I think that's an important thing to think about. The other thing is that this transfer has begun, and it's going to probably reach its high point in about 2040 or 2045, and then begin to decline again. Earlier estimates predicted that the high point would come much sooner because they were based on typical life expectancies. But as my friend Russell James will point out, we know two things. Wealthy people live longer. Generous, wealthy people live longest of all. And so it's going to happen, it's going to take longer and happen later than we might have originally thought.
I'd love to dig into why, but I have a feeling that might be hard. Yeah, but I've heard that too. And also that the money, once people start giving, let's say they're giving during their lifetime, and as you just point out, generous people don't just start with a bequest typically, right? I mean, there are often people who are giving already in their lifetimes, relationships that we've built together with them. But that it doesn't mean that the money is gone as a result of their giving during their lifetime.
Two things. It doesn't mean, it means that, you know, it has gone to our organization or others. And in fact, one of the most accurate predictors that somebody is going to include your organization in their estate plan is their loyalty. Have they been giving to you loyally over a long period of time? Have they given 7 out of the last 10 years? Have they given 15 out of the last 20? And you should be able to find this in your database. That doesn't require an expensive. There are other things that you can do with expensive third-party data analysis. This isn't something that you need them for. So I think that's an important thing. The other thing that we know is that I said that $72 trillion will go to the heirs of these individuals, which means they will have more assets and they will be in a better position to give. So it's also about nurturing the relationships with that next generation whose gifts might be modest today, but could be really fueled by these inheritances in the future.
It's really important to retain these donors. That's something we talk about every single day.
Absolutely. And the magnitude of their giving is less important than the longevity of their giving. So don't just, I think we sometimes make a mistake and we think that it's the wealthy septuagenarian who we should be talking to. People have probably done their estate planning by then. People do their first estate plan usually in their 40s. They make their first charitable provision sometime in their 50s, maybe when the kids are becoming more independent. And they change their wills probably 5 or 6 times over the course of their lifetime. So it's not TikTok game locked. But these conversations should start much earlier than we sometimes have felt a legacy society or a planned giving kind of initiative should focus.
And how early?
I would say that as soon as you see that somebody has established a pattern, a habit of giving to your organization, perhaps they've given 3 out of the last 4 years, 5 out of the last 7 years, and you feel that they've reached a life stage, which probably means they don't have elementary school kids in the house. It probably means that they're in their 40s or 50s, and it can start small. I talk in the book about 4 or 5 different ways that organizations build endowment. Sometimes people will append endowment to a capital campaign. We're building a new building. It's going to cost $12 million. Let's add another $3 million to endow the maintenance of that building. It's a $15 million campaign. I think one of the challenges with that is that the building costs go up and all of a sudden you spent 14 on the building and there's only $1 million left in endowment. Seen it a million times. Some organizations do endowment only campaigns. It's our 40th anniversary. We want to increase our endowment to $40 million. We're going to do all the campaign hoopla, but focus all the gifts on endowment. That can work, but understand endowments are fueled almost exclusively by individual donors. Corporations and foundations do not give to endowment. There are a few exceptions. The Lilly Endowment is an exception. Bloomberg Charities, apparently, as of today, is an exception. They just gave $600 million today to endow 4 HBCUs. It's a beautiful thing. But it's individual donors, and not every individual loves to give to endowment. Some do, some don't. And so if you're doing an endowment only campaign, you're kind of constrained your audience. I like to do either a major gift style endowment building initiative where you're setting up metrics, and we can talk more about that. And if you can't do anything else, do the slow drip method. On every email or every message that you send out, direct mail, social media, email, just a little subordinate line, please remember to include us in your estate plans. Anytime there's a response device online, or if you still use a good old business reply envelope, there are a couple of boxes. I'm interested in learning more about including ABC charity in my estate, or I've already included ABC cause in my estate, so that you can begin to, you're just planting the seeds and then beginning to capture some information about who has already made that plan.
And don't leave anybody out. It sounds like if they self-identify to any of those vehicles, which are probably going to go and touch almost everybody in your
Exactly.
constituency, let them choose to be a part of that party if they want to, right?
Exactly. And then and so let's say you do that, somebody checks the box that says, I want to learn more. It's like, what do I do now? There are a few options. One goes back quite a ways, but there was an old-fashioned initiative called Leave a Legacy. It was actually created by my friend Diana Newman. She tells stories about being at her kitchen table. She was then the vice president of the Columbus Foundation, and her friend Steve Risch was the head of the Nationwide Insurance Foundation. They sat at the kitchen table. Her kids were running around on the floor beneath them, and they created Leave a Legacy. Very simple materials, unbranded, that any organization can share with any donor. And they're still available through the national NCPG, National Charitable Gift Planners, NCGP. National Charitable Gift Planners website. So you can still find them there, download them, use them. They're free. There's no copyright. If that's what you can do that.
I'm curious about a couple things with the people who are in the room with us. And you just made reference to how most people at a certain point in their life, they have a will. But one of the statistics I read about, at least in the past, was that 75% of people don't even have a will. Now that may be, I don't know if that's true any longer, and it may be in part because so many people don't have a lot of assets. That's another factor. But as you pointed out before, if the idea is to spread a wide net so people can participate in this and make a gift, you don't have to look back very far for examples like the Osceola McCarthy gift, where a person saved carefully their whole life. They did not live with very much, but they were able to make an extraordinary transformational gift at the end of their life. And I'm curious about it. I want to hear your thoughts on it, but I'm also interested to know with the audience, and if you don't want to answer this, I understand. I'm not going to read names, but I'm curious to know if you have a will. And nobody's going to be trying to market stuff to you here. And the reason I'm asking is because I know that, like you said, a life event often informs what we do. And often if we make a will when we're younger, let's say to protect a child, part of charitable planning may not be something that we discuss with a financial advisor if we're in our 40s. But that's when you said we need to start thinking about these things with our donors. So do you have thoughts on this about maybe how the discussions might be different with people who maybe haven't even made a will or thought about an estate plan yet, but they might be really ready to start thinking about this?
A couple of things. First of all, I put the actual link to the website in the chat. So
Thank
for
you.
somebody who asked for it, from National Charitable Gift Planners, the Leave a Legacy materials. It's interesting. I cite Russell James a fair bit in the book. I love his work, and especially his work on story. And he talks about the fact that, and in some cultures it's stronger than others, but that that there is a mortality aversion. And when you start talking to people about their estate planning, you are talking to them about mortality.
Right.
And as I said, in some cultures, this is even stronger than in others. But for all of us, we don't like thinking about our own demise. His point is, and you know how he leans into the universal hero story.
Mm-hmm.
His point is that we can overcome that by talking to people about how to be a hero in perpetuity. You've been so important in sustaining our outreach program to early learning centers. I know that that's given you a lot of joy. We could have a conversation about how you could ensure that that outreach can always take place. And so now you begin to open up the conversation about how that might happen. There are some organizations, there are a few online free or low cost will planning tools online. I would be careful about those. I'm not going to endorse one or another, but I know that for some of them, the completion rate and the inclusion of charitable provisions is very low. They're kind of a nice, bright, shiny object. Many organizations, they either have a professional advisory group, and they might do occasionally some educational seminars for their donors and stakeholders about how to plan for your future. You can do that. Be very careful that those professional advisors understand that they cannot sell their products and services when they do those workshops for you. They've got to be completely objective. The local community foundation, even in small communities and rural communities, I saw a question about rural communities.
Mm-hmm.
Often a community foundation is a great civic connector, and they will often have workshops and training for the people who want to include a charitable provision. And then the final thing I would say is that almost everybody has anybody who's in a position to make a charitable gift has some sort of a beneficiary designation. They've got retirement assets. They've got life insurance policies, even if it's through work. And when they set those up, they had to choose a beneficiary. Who, at the end of my life, who will get any assets that remain in this IRA or 401k or 503b? You don't need anything fancy to talk to them about. You could consider making us the beneficiary of those accounts. either fully or even some percentage. You could say, I want 80% to go to my church and 20% to go to the Humane Society. So I think educating people too about they have assets they might not even be thinking about when they think about how they could fuel a gift through the transfer of their assets at the end of their lifetime.
There are a couple things in there that I want to touch on. One you mentioned earlier, and that's about the importance of bequests to endowments. And part of what you said earlier is that you can start working on these things now. I mean, with your current donors, all of them living and hopefully will for a long time. But that endowments are often fueled, of course, by these bequests. So that means that people have to consider a bequest. They can't just let the money flow through. I think you've experienced that yourself in your work with Benefactor. Can you give us kind of a case study example of how that rolls out?
Sure. I'll talk about a campaign I was involved in early in my career. It was for a historical society in a rural community. And there was a woman in that community who was thought to be amongst the wealthiest residents of the county. It was a countywide historical society. The campaign was for $8 million. And so therefore the lead gift was assumed to be a gift of $1 million. And as part of our planning, we interviewed this woman. She'd also written a history of the county, by the way. We knew that she had an affinity for history and had been on the board of this organization. And she said she was thinking about giving $50,000. Well, Jay, if she had given $50,000, there would not be a campaign. But we knew that a portion of the campaign goal was for capital improvements to their museum facilities, and a portion of it was for endowment. And so we guided the client through a lot of good steps to strengthen that connection. But what we also did was talked with her, and she ended up, through that really good engagement and cultivation, making $1 million pledge, of which $500,000 was for capital and $500,000 was included in her estate designated for endowment. And poignantly, she passed away before the campaign ended, and that gift was realized as well. So it allowed her to make the $1 million gift, the organization to say, we have a lead gift for the side campaign we want to have. It allowed her to perpetuate her values. And in fact, her wishes were followed even more quickly than anybody thought they would be.
Oh, by the way, someone mentioned in the chat, just to the host and panelists, that you've had a little difficulty with finding the why give and how to give downloads on that particular website. So we'll see what we can do about that.
Yeah, it's a third party professional association. We can let them know, but if you can't, try to find what other resources you can there. I would also, as I said, go talk to your local community foundation. And by the way, if you're a smaller organization, you may want to consider partnering. I'm a big fan of community foundations. You talked about the fact that I was on the board of the Legacy Fund of the Columbus Foundation. That was an affinity fund for LGBTQ and their allies. And so I think the thing that happens with a smaller organization, a newer organization, an endowment is a lifetime, a perpetual bet on your organization. And sometimes donors can have pause if you're a younger organization or a smaller organization. And they can then, therefore, the community foundation can give you the credibility and the longevity so that, gosh, I love ballet. I want to support this scrappy young ballet company. But what if they're not around after my lifetime? Well, you can tell the community foundation, then support the next closest scrappy young ballet company.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of reassurance in partnering with somebody like the community foundation. They will charge you a fee. Any money manager will charge you a fee. And the monies they earned will go back into things like donor education and agency services and the good of the community. So that's why I'm a big fan, and in fact, have some funds at our local Columbus Foundation, which is a great one.
I'm so glad you said that, because sometimes there are a lot of assumptions made about these things, and one of them is that they're too restrictive. And you just gave an example of how something can be made to still honor the wishes of a family, but remain flexible for the future, and then needs the future, and those things change.
And that's something of a balancing act when you create endowed funds or when you work with a donor whose gift will create the endowed fund. You don't want it to be so restrictive. For example, I talk in the book about back in the day, there were a lot of endowments for the perpetual care of polio patients.
Right.
And then, glory be, polio was cured. If the donor wasn't still living, many of those hospitals mainly had to go off to, in Pennsylvania, widows and orphans court to have the constraints lifted and a judge determine. So you want it to be, donors will want it to align with their values and their interests. So in that regard, you want it to be concrete and for them to have context. Whereas I think the organization wants it to be as flexible as possible, and you've got to find that middle ground.
We did have a question from Carolyn, who had asked if you're recommending in some of these statements that focusing a planned giving campaign on endowment only.
Well, here's the thing. You can't build a building with a planned giving campaign because you don't know when the assets will be secured. But no, it doesn't have to be endowment only. It can be reserves. For example, it can, not everybody loves endowment. You know, when money goes into an endowment, we're going to draw 4.5% or 5% per year in perpetuity. Now, that means there's a lot of money still sitting in that fund that's not going out to do good work. Is the bad news. The good news is that after 20 years, the fund would have been depleted, but now it just keeps on going in perpetuity. And so we're just going to keep drawing from it. But not everybody loves that model. Strategic reserves can be an alternative. There can be other ways that you can focus those planned gifts. I personally feel that most donors who make planned gifts and most have the sense that these are the assets that I built up over my lifetime. I don't want you to use them to pay the light bill in 1 year. I've built them up over my lifetime. I would like for you to invest them in something that is more, has more longevity. So I think that's important, but endowment fits that, reserves fit that. Sometimes there can be something like a president's or a director's discretionary fund that might be used for special initiatives like standing up a new social enterprise. So I think that there are other things that can be done, but you can't do a planned giving campaign and then expect to build a building with it because those contractors expect to get paid in cash.
I have a whole bunch of questions which are more on the technical side of this, but I want to make sure that there's room for the folks in the room with us we cannot hear. So if you have questions about your own program or one you're contemplating or your interactions with donors about these issues, I hope you'll ask them now. We will definitely be listening and integrate them into the conversation. So we have one from Frank who had said, what's the title of those who develop a planned giving program for people? And that might sound like a throwaway question to some of us, but it's not, because there's been debate for a long time about what to call people in fundraising so it doesn't scare people off. And when you're talking about things that touch on mortality, actually, this is pretty meaningful. So how are people now having that conversation? How are they characterizing their work? What are they calling themselves?
I'm going to lean on my friend and colleague, Russell James again. He did a fascinating study, and he had people who work in our profession make calls to donors and to see how frequently they would get, if they left a voicemail, how frequently would they get a response. If their title had development or advancement in it, it was among the lowest responses. But if it has something, a donor services professional, that's what most community foundations will have. They have donor services departments or a philanthropy advisor, some sort of a title that makes it clear that I am the bridge between the organization and you as a donor, and I am here. And we need to remember our, AFP guidelines and all of that. I'm here to serve you as a donor Bill of Rights. So we're serving the donor, even if it means saying, we really can't accept your historic train sets as a gift to our museum, but I can help you find a place that could. Or, I'm sorry, we can't endow that kind of a program, but I can help you I can make a suggestion for a place that will. So we might end up sending them out to another organization. But I would say some sort of title like that, philanthropy advisor, donors advisor, something like that.
These gifts of particular objects are really, they can be thorny. And the train set is a new one. Well, I know we could spend hours talking about that, but as a general rule, is that why it's good to have this conversation, whether it's with a community foundation or with a general, like a philanthropy advisor within the organization, someone who can help the person to honor their wishes, but in a way that's broad enough that it won't be too restrictive. I'm thinking about works of art, particularly, which I know you've dealt with. And this is, someone loves the work may have value. It doesn't always, but then the question is, can we sell it?
Well, the question is, and especially if it's an art museum, it gets, it has to do with their collections policies and frankly, even goes back to their accreditation by AAM, if and how and when they accept gifts of art. So, and I know that there was also a question about the difference between a will and a trust. So let me just say, I am not an expert on plan giving vehicles. And at some point, you should encourage or even require your donors to go talk to their own independent professional advisors about all of this. But if somebody wants to give you a tangible asset, that can be a good way to give because they get credit for the full value of the asset, not what they paid for it. It includes things like stock, crypto, but also collectibles, art. If they were, I know that we see in the art museum world that collectors, who by the way, love their collections. They're like their children and they don't want to think about the family getting split up. So that's a complicating factor. But if they're going to make a gift of art, the donor at the donor's sole expense has to get a qualified appraisal. So that's number one, is you need to send the donor off. You can give them a list of qualified appraisers if you want to, but they, at their sole expense, have to go get, that's an IRS rule. You're not being a bad guy. The IRS requires this. It's easy to make them a bad guy. They have to go get that appraisal. I do know that many collectors, their children or grandchildren don't want the collection. Or more importantly, if it has increased in value and it comes to that next generation, that could be a taxable event. And they're not getting cash to pay the taxes. They're getting these illiquid assets, great works of art. So that can be problematic for a family. But the tax treatment of the gift, and this is all I'm going to say, and then go talk to advisors, will differ for the donor if you're going to sell the collection versus if you are going to employ that collection in pursuit of your mission. The taxable treatment is much more generous for the donor if you're going to employ that in the pursuit of your mission. Now, I will say, we saw for a while that some donors were choosing to give their collections to, say, a hospital instead of an art museum because they wanted it on the halls, bringing peace and healing to people, or to a College of Art and Design where it would be part of the teaching collection. So a lot to dig into there, but what I would say is that if you believe that your donors will be using some sort of illiquid complex asset to fuel their charitable gifts, all the more reason to have a relationship. One of the best ways to process one of those gifts is through a donor advised fund. Go to your community foundation and talk about setting up an agency donor advised fund so that the gifts can go through that.
And I think in the context of giving those examples and those illustrations, you probably answered Kim's question, but I still want to honor it by mentioning it in case you have anything additional to add. And that's that Kim had said that in addition to fulfilling personal philanthropic desires, what are some of the common benefits that we might typically tell donors they could realize as a result of listing a nonprofit as a beneficiary?
So, I think there are a few things, but I think the main one is we know giving brings people joy. And so this is a way for them to experience that warm glow of giving. And not only that, but to ensure that something that was important to them, a value that they held during their lifetime, is continued beyond their lifetime, conveyed to future generations, maybe future generations of their very own family who can see that the education program that grandma endowed, now I understand why she cared so much about this particular outreach program. So I think that perpetuation of values and the warm glow of giving are the ones that we as development professionals should lean into. And we don't need a fancy, high-paid plan giving officer to do that. We just need to be inspiring about our mission. There are some forms of, and by the way, 80% of plan gifts are simple bequests. And then another significant percentage are beneficiary designations. There's nothing tricky about either one of those. When we do get into some more complex kinds of charitable remainder annuity trusts or unit trusts, et cetera, that's the point at which, first of all, the donor is probably sophisticated and has their own team of advisors. You may want somebody advising you and your organization as well as you nurture that gift. And those can bring certain benefits if they have a very large or complex estate. talk to the professionals about all that.
And
require that your donor have professional advisors.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that, because we're not the financial advisors.
No.
We're representing the institutions. And you kind of got to it there too, but Savannah had said, how would you recommend someone start a planned giving program? Do you wait for a good moment to begin? Or do you need, in other words, those fancy planned giving officers or not?
No, I'll make another shameless pitch. The book, the book has 9 chapters. Buy the book, do a book club, have everybody read a chapter a month, and it will have a lot of the guidance that you need to do that. Don't wait. You don't know. About 25% of donors who've made charitable provisions in their estate plan inform the nonprofit organization, which means 75% don't. You don't know what's out there soaking on your behalf already. There probably is something. But the hallmarks of a good planned giving program include the fact that you are doing, that you are making it known that you have the capacity to receive these gifts, that you've adopted policies. You've got some housekeeping to do. What kind of policies do you have? If you're going to build endowment, do you have an endowment management policy, an investment policy, and a gift acceptance policy? So make sure that you've got all of those, and working with your board or your board committee to develop those can be a great educational opportunity for them. We think policies are dull until they're bad policies or disregard, and then it gets really exciting in a bad way. So go through the policy exercise. And if you're a member of, I think AFP has some sample policies on their website. I know AAM has sample policies. CASE, if you're in higher education, has sample policies. So do that housekeeping first, which will also now get your board involved in the fact that, oh, we're getting serious and professional about how we're going to build endowment and do our planned giving. So I think that's important. And then, no, get started. Start talking to people about it. Start elevating donors who either living donors who have informed you that I've included the organization in the will, then do an interview with them and put the little video on your website about what motivated you to do this on our behalf. Talk about programs that are funded by endowments and how that funding allows them to, I use the example of a mobile mammography unit that serves rural communities, women in rural communities, and how, that's the kind of thing that a donor could endow the operation of something like that. And that would be a reasonable thing to ask that donor to do. But then in a really good year, you might be tempted to say, oh, we're going to leave the money in the endowment because we don't need it. We're going to pull it from this other pocket and pay for the mammography unit. Don't do that. Don't do that. Give the donor the joy of knowing that you will always draw from that endowment to pay for the mammography unit. Now, if you have some extra dollars, put them into your quasi-endowment. A quasi-endowment is much more flexible for you. So, and the other thing I would say is that no donor wants to think that they're taking money out of their savings account or their money market account simply to put it into yours. They want the money to have impact. And so I would say that I don't like those organizations that say, we're not going to draw on our endowment until it gets to X. As a donor, I want to say, well, tell me when it gets to X and I'll give it to you then, because I want to see my money put to work. So even if the draw is $5,000, find something great to do with the $5,000 and then tell the world about it.
Well, you also talked about right there about doing something during the donor's lifetime. So that's presuming, of course, that it's not an unexpected bequest, but we've built the relationship, we've invited them, they have expressed an interest, they've done what they need to do with their financial advisors, then they have made the commitment. And at that point, why not honor people while they're living? Not only to celebrate that so others will be inspired by it, that video on the website, but also because isn't that a nice thing to do, to let people know how helpful they've been?
And to ensure that you're using the money in the way in which they intended, to encourage others to join, as you said. So I think that's all very important, and it doesn't need to be expensive or complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if you have a legacy society, first of all, you might think about naming it something other than Legacy Society. If you're an HBCU, maybe it's the HBCU land grant, maybe it's an 1890 society. If you have a diverse donor base and you are hoping that you will be receiving these kinds of gifts from, among others, people of color, take a look at who you're naming it after or who it was named after and make sure that it's not somebody who could perhaps be tied to some exploitational activities. But give it a name. And then, recognition that listings in program booklets in the annual report on the website. You don't have to have a big special event. You could do an annual leadership briefing call, and everybody can join a Zoom who's in the Legacy Society, and the CEO or president is going to give them some of the inside scoop. People love that. And then maybe at an existing event, there's a pre-cocktail for members of the Legacy Society, or special seating up front for members of the Legacy Society, which makes them visible to everybody else, which is good. It doesn't have to be its own special event. You can carve out a space for them in the stuff you're already doing.
We had a question earlier from Teresa, and this might get into the more legalistic aspects, but I still want to make sure I vocalize it. So that's there may be problems, or Teresa believes there may be problems with probate with a will, but not with a trust. I don't know if you want to get into that, or maybe just suggest how you would explore those kinds of concerns.
First of all, I would talk to your advisors, maybe the donor and the donor's advisors. My understanding, and this is a layperson's understanding, so again, get advisors, is that really good trust and estate counsel will help to move everything out of the probatable portion of the estate. But you can, people can arrange in fact, my husband and I have arranged the charitable bequests in our will so that they are paid out of the will. They're not paid out of the remainder, and, because we're trying to get everything out of probate and out into where we want it to go. So that's number one. Whereas a trust is funded. When it's created, there's a funding mechanism that is created for it, but then there can also be strings tied to a trust. So I'm not an expert, but I think once our job is to trigger that impulse to be generous with my estate. And we've talked a lot about planned giving and less about endowment. So maybe we'll spend the last few minutes just talking about that. But that's our job. And then to work through those who have the right kinds of credentials to make sure that it's structured in a way that best meets the organization's needs and the donor's needs.
So let's talk about endowment, and we can go anywhere you want with that. One thing I do want to ask you, hopefully you can address in the context of this, is the thing I've encountered in my work, which is this kind of almost competition between cash now and endowment later, especially in a capital campaign, where you have these conversations and people say, oh no, people don't want to give to endowment. This kind of almost prejudicial assumptions about what people will and won't do. And if you have any thoughts about how to make sure our offices get on board with making sure endowment's always a piece of the puzzle.
Right. Well, I've generally found that if a donor, or if somebody says to you, donors don't want to do X, or donors don't want to do Y, mostly what they're telling you is what they do and don't want to do. So, write it down, but it's about them. It's not about everybody else. The second thing I would say, first of all, if somebody, and we're going to go back to planned giving for a moment, but if somebody gives to your endowment or makes a provision for a planned gift, they are more likely to support your organization annually and give more. So to those who fear that, if they put that provision in place for the future, if they fund our endowment, we're not going to get money from them anymore. The opposite is actually what's true. It might be counterintuitive, but think about it. Somebody has bet on your future. They don't want you to languish in the present. So I think that's important, and one reason why we should be having these conversations with folks. And different donors will have different interests. I will say I have some concern that the younger generations of donors may not have the same interest in endowment that their parents or grandparents did, especially entrepreneurs who know how to leverage money and see that endowment as being fairly inflexible. And they may have gone through the Great Recession or the pandemic and seen that those assets really couldn't go to work as much as we needed them to. So for them, I would say be clear about reserves in addition to endowment, reserve funds that can provide that kind of balance sheet strength that your organization could need from time to time. And then also, I learned about some wonderful work that's being done, in this case by the Walters Museum in Baltimore. And they have a nice endowment. They are embedded within a community that has many disadvantages. And what they have done is really opened themselves up to that community, and they are taking their endowment, a portion of it, much of it is invested in the market in a balanced portfolio, but they're taking a portion of it and they are using it for impact investments. And they have a whole set of criteria for what they will invest in. And they're saying, we'll take about $6 million of our endowment And instead of investing it in stocks or bonds, we're going to invest it in startup businesses that bring goods and services to the people in our neighborhood. So one of their first investments was in with a low-income housing developer that is improving the housing stock that is right around them, which then says to that entrepreneurial, often younger donor, I can give you a triple win. You can make a gift to our endowment, feel great about that, be recognized as a donor to our organization and our campaign. We're going to use the draw to do these great things, fuel these great programs at our museum. And the third win is that we are going to use a portion of that gift to fuel these impact investments that we are making, where we expect a return on that investment. You know, at some point, we're going to pull our money back out of that housing developer with interest. But for now, your money is going to work for yourself, the joy of giving, for the museum, fueling our programs, and for the neighborhood because we're investing it in these impact investments. I think that's going to be important as we begin to look at the next generation of endowment donors.
What you described right there requires not only that kind of commitment to the community in that case, but also a financial savvy and a kind of a chutzpah that many organizations either don't have or don't want to practice, because maybe out of fear that even if that might be appealing to a donor on a financial basis, they might be reluctant to invest in something where they say, is a nonprofit really the best investor of an impact fund, investment fund? So what are your thoughts on kind of melding what is essentially in some respects a conservative instrument, something that preserves the future of the organization and its work, with something that's, kind of a little bit radical?
It is. It's also, I think, how much wealth in this society has been built. And by, think about the people who were friends of Bill Gates's parents and put a little bit of money into little Billy's enterprise. So it is a way that a lot of good things are generated, and business people understand that, even conservative, otherwise conservative business people. But you're right, it's going to take time, attention. Are we distracting from other things that we should be focused on? In this instance, they did have some extraordinary talent on their board that was able to guide this. If it's something that you're interested in pursuing, but are concerned about having the capacity to support it, I would say a couple of things like looking at, here in Central Ohio, we have the Human Service Chamber. Could they do a collective kind of thing? We also have a nonprofit venture capital fund called Rev1 Ventures. Let them vet and make the decisions. You can give the criteria. We want it to be in this geography or serving these kinds of needs and have this kind of return. So you can create the criteria and have a third party do that work. But you're right, this is a very high level of endowment management. If you've got $1 million of endowment, you're not doing this. The Baltimore Museum is called the Walters Museum in Baltimore. It's their encyclopedic art museum. It's a wonderful one. And their criteria for impact investing is actually, they gave me permission to include it in the book. So it's in the resources. So in September, go pre-order the book. We'll give you the links in a minute. And then it can be on your desk September 18th, and you'll see the criteria that they use to determine what they would invest in. I was really impressed with the work that they're doing.
And if you go to Baltimore, definitely visit that museum.
Yes, absolutely.
It's wonderful.
Perhaps the most important thing to say about that.
But it also shows that you can be around for a long time, still be in a sector which has undergone a lot of pain, which the arts have, but still make investments in things that are really cutting edge. Which I guess maybe it isn't in finance, but it certainly is in the nonprofit sector, and can be quite successful. I do have one just little question here, which is back on the campaigns and major gifts and planned gifts and especially endowment, about counting. So if you're in an educational institution, we often look to case for the guidelines about, well, how old does the person have to be to count that pledge on the bequest and so forth. Do you have any guidance, especially for those who don't know what I'm talking about, for how one can have a campaign and then whether or not they can count a bequest towards their campaign goal, which can often influence their ability to finance a new structure as well as ongoing support for programs?
So the first thing I'll say is there are 4 concepts: counting, accounting, credit, and recognition. Those are 4 different concepts. We often conflate them, don't conflate them. That I think will address a lot of the confusion right there. But yes, how can you count a planned or deferred gift? And there are great guidelines. I think CASE is probably the gold standard in those guidelines. And I think the important thing is transparency and counting. Accounting is going to follow GAAP, so they're fine. Transparency in counting and reporting. So to date, our campaign is to raise $15 million to build and endow a new educational facility. To date, we've raised $12 million. Of that amount, I'm trying to do the math in my head, $8 million has been in cash and short-term pledges. $2 million has been in irrevocable planned and deferred gifts. And $2 million has been in simple bequests and other kinds of deferred gifts. So see, you can report it all transparently. I know we have a client where planned gifts are playing a role in bolstering their confidence to proceed with a massive transformational building project. They can use their reserves to backstop it for the time being, but they know, and the donor is of an age, and so they know that this gift is also in the pipeline. The other thing I'll say is not all planned gifts are deferred. Some planned gifts are current gifts. There are split interest gifts, annuities. I think be very careful if you go down that route. If you don't have an annuity program, it's very risky to start one. An annuity program, the risk diminishes with the number of annuitants that you have. So unless, you think you're going to get 1,000 people to sign up right off, I would maybe look at partnering with somebody else to do those annuities. And that, the donor makes a gift of $100,000, depending on the donor's age, you agree that you are going to do a payout every year for the rest of their life. So, and just like we said, generous people live longer. But there are suggested rates to use. But that's money that you will have right away, but you'll need to reserve some of it to pay out the annuity annually. But even things like making a gift from a donor advised fund, I would call that a planned gift because the donor sat and thought about fueling the donor advised fund, making the gift from the donor advised fund. There are other kinds of current gifts that can be planned gifts and used to build the building. The only way that I would include planned gifts in any kind of calculus for a capital campaign is if I had the borrowing capacity, and this is reassuring me that my reserves are going to be able to be rebuilt over the course of time.
You talked about setting something up in your household as well. I'm curious to know what that process was like for you. Is that something that you as a family just said, this is something we want to do? Did you have a relationship where a charity suggested this to you? What role, if any, did a financial advisor play? So for you, kind of taking off your professional hat, how has this experience been and what can optimize it for the donor? That's probably instructive for the rest of us.
Well, I will say a couple of things. My husband and I, knock wood, talk about how we've been blessed beyond our expectations and are left in the fortunate position of being able to make some of these decisions. Our only child is, we went through that process where she was in college and we wanted to make sure she would always be taken care of. And then she graduated and got her master's and got her CPA and is now a partner at PwC. She's fine. She does have 5 children, but she's fine. And so in talking to our financial advisor and in knowing what, we'd had talked to her in advance and, what are your desires or expectations? And I can tell you that that freed us considerably, her expectations, which were none, freed us considerably to think about things. You heard me say we're a big believer in community foundations. And so we've shared with the community foundation that much of what we will do, not all of it, there are a few specific bequests, but much of the rest of it will go to the community foundation. During our lifetime, what that means is that we get invited to all of their donor education things. They bring really interesting speakers to the community. They shine a light on some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that the community faces. We feel like it helps us to become more informed donors. I will say that a couple of the charities that we have included, we haven't told them. We don't, and this is common, that sometimes donors feel as though they have a target on their back. For those of us, for me as a consultant, we work with 80 different organizations a year, worked with 1,000 or more over the course of my career. They're not all beneficiaries, nor can they be. And so, a lot of our gifts are made either anonymously or in the name of our donor advised fund, which is a very obscure name. So people by and large don't associate it with us. But those were some of the considerations that we felt a great sense of gratitude. I think gratitude is sort of the fertilizer for generosity. We felt gratitude. We were at a life stage and in a fortunate position to be able to think about this. It was a fun conversation to have over a few dinners. And our financial advisor kind of let us have a sense of, here's what I think, running the Monte Carlo simulations, here's what it could be. And so then we went off to trust and estate counsel, and she consummated it for us.
The reason I asked you that, I didn't ask you if I should ask you a question like that.
No, you didn't.
But I really appreciate it, because I think all of us in the field have to be able to see this through the eyes of a person who's making this decision. Some of us have had the opportunity, some of us haven't. Some of us have a will, as we found out earlier, and some of us don't. So knowing this in a sense beyond the numbers, I think is very helpful. You've spent a lot of time thinking about these issues professionally, but you focused a lot on endowment, and you decided to take a deep dive on endowment for this book. I have a feeling it's not just because of $12 trillion. Why is the endowment so meaningful to you? Why are you such an advocate for it?
But two reasons. One, that earlier book that you mentioned in the introduction, in 2004, Diana Newman published Endowment Building Basics through Wiley, my publisher, as a part of the nonprofit Basics series. She retired from Benefactor Group. She spent the end of her career at Benefactor Group. And when she retired, she went to an attorney and had the intellectual property reassigned to the firm as a gift to the firm upon her retirement, and said, Laura, it's time for you to rewrite this book. Which was wonderful. And I would say that about the first third of the book is built very much on the infrastructure that Diana created. There's a lot of new material, though, about who gives and why they give and how they make the decisions to give and who advises them about their giving. But the other thing is that I have seen both the joy that endowments have brought to donors and the resilience. That's the subtitle of the book. Creating a resilient cause, the resilience that it gives to a nonprofit organization that has just that little bit of, I can sigh and take a step back, and I know I've got this part covered, so I can focus on the rest. And, I really see the power that has for the donor, for the organization, and for the beneficiaries of the organization.
Thank you for all this, Laura. Before people go, can you pull up the image of that so we can all see it? And I don't know if there's a QR code there or something that people can have. And by the way, as we're doing that, I just want to say a couple things. First, we do have a session coming up this Thursday. I hope you'll join us for regarding case statements with Andy Brommel. I'm sure you'll enjoy that, because case statements are the essential piece, which are often the bane of our existence because we don't always write the best ones. So please join us for that 3:30 on Thursday. But also, there is going to be a letter coming to you, an email, I should say, with a link to this recording. And please do feel free to share that with your colleagues who probably need to have a discussion with you about how to bring joy to donors by introducing them to this instrument of the endowment, which can seem awfully strange and disembodied, but it's not at all, as we've just heard. So
I had another web page up, and then I went to look for that. Here we go. There's the whole thing. It's available for pre-order now at, as you can see, several different organizations. I understand that Bookshop, if you go to Bookshop and or a couple of others, if you wanted to buy it, for example, for your whole board, they'll give you a discount, and they will even put a belly band or some sort of a sticker on it with your organization's logo, so that, and if you're interested in learning more, we'll have more information on our website soon, including some of the resources that are in the book, because we also want to make them freely available. I think the book is a great resource for folks, but we don't want buying the book to be a constraint to learning how to build endowment.
Right. Well, and it's also not a constraint on being able to speak with you, as we found out today. So if people want to have more conversation with you or follow your work, how can they best do that?
As you heard Jay say at the beginning, I'm the founder and principal of Benefactor Group. So go to our website, benefactorgroup.com. We try to have a lot of good resources on there that you can use in a lot of different ways, including resources on endowment. And there will be a link to we're going to have a mini site about the book with some of the resources. It should be up in the next few days. I think that's the main way to find me. We'll also be having a forum. So if you're interested in having me come to speak to your AFP chapter or another group, we're going to be scheduling some of that out. And I believe that we're looking at doing two things, Jay. One is if you pre-order the book or order by a certain date, probably something like October 1st, we'll do a free webinar for any book purchaser. So look for that opportunity. And then for those who buy books in volume, probably 5 or more for their board or their whole staff, we'll do a free half-hour consultation webinar for you and your organization. So just know that there are lots of ways to connect. And I will probably be out there speaking a fair bit in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you again, Laura, for all of this.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who's here joining us live, all those who are enjoying the recording. I hope that this has been beneficial for your own internal conversations within your organizations and maybe even in your house. And we'll look forward to seeing you all next time. But stick around and please fill out the survey. You're going to see it come up as soon as you check out today. See you all soon. Take care.